Hey guys, Taki here. Today we're going to take a look at the new TRIMUI Smart Pro. With buttons straight from a Game Boy Advance SP, styling from a Switch, and analog sticks from a Vita, it's TRIMUI's best device thus far, and it's one that might be worth a spot in your collection. Let's start by taking a look at the price and the specs of this guy. When it comes to the price, there are a few different things that are floating around right now, and I don't feel like all of them are based on reality. There is a lot of wishful thinking going on right now when it comes to the price. Based on what I can see, this should retail within the $60 to $75 range, and that's a good price for this hardware. Unfortunately, TRIMUI does not sell directly to consumers like other brands, so we are at the mercy of third-party distributors, and those guys have this pegged at $90 for some reason. I don't anticipate that price will exist once the insane pre-order pricing is done, so check the link in the description for up-to-date pricing. When it comes to the specs, we have a lot of new things here that we've not seen before. The TRIMUI Smart Pro is powered by the all-winner A133P SoC with 4 A53 cores clocked at 2 GHz. Our GPU is a PowerVR GE8300 at 660 MHz, and I know some people are worried when they hear that name, but we do have working GPU drivers with this. We also have 1 GB of LPDDR4 RAM, but the unit that I have here uses LPDDR4X. And we have 64 GB of storage with an SD card slot and 8 GB of onboard eMMC storage. Finishing up, we have a 4.96-inch 720p panel, a 5000 mAh battery, built-in Wi-Fi 5, and our operating system is built on Tina Linux. In this section, we're going to do an overview of the build quality and the layout of the device. The star of the show is the 5-inch 720p panel, and based on my experience with this so far, I think that's going to be one of the biggest reasons to even buy this thing in the first place. It's a really nice 5-inch panel, and I think it suits this perfectly. This time around, TRIMUI has gone for a Vita-like layout. They have a D-pad and ABXY buttons on the top half, and these are clicky buttons just like on a Vita or on a Game Boy Advance SP if you have that device. Below these, they have 2 analog sticks that are recessed into the shell with an LED ring light around them that changes color depending on a couple of different things. Being a Vita clone, these unfortunately do not have any click functionality. They could have implemented it because we have seen that done before in other handhelds, but they didn't in this device. As it is, this part works really well, and I'm a fan of the soft rubber top that you get with a Vita analog. And that just leaves us with the 3 bottom buttons. The left is a menu button, and the functionality of this is going to change depending on where you are in the system. And on the right side, we have select and start. And again, these are all clicky buttons. On the bottom of the device, on both sides of the screen, you'll see that we have this cutout for audio. This might lead you to believe that we have front-firing speakers on this, but we don't. The speakers are actually on the back, and the sound just travels out through this part. When it comes to the top, it looks like they're going for a Switch-style layout. The buttons on these don't really compare to the Switch. I think the Switch buttons are better. When it comes to L1 and R1, we have pretty loud, clicky buttons, whereas the ones on the Switch are a bit lighter and easier to press. When it comes to R2 and L2, those are pretty clicky, and based on my time with this so far, I don't think that these buttons are big enough. They probably should have been a bit bigger like they are on the Switch to make this more comfortable to use. I'll probably have more to say on this towards the end of the video when I've had more time on this, but I would say right now, R1 and L1 aren't that bad, but R2 and L2 are not great. This thing really should have been bigger than it is. That just leaves us with the volume buttons, a USB port, and a power button. And this does have sleep functionality. If we single press this, you'll see that the device will go to sleep. And if I press it again, the device will wake up. Finishing up, we have nothing on either side of the device, but we do have a few interesting things on the bottom. The first is a function switch. If we slide this over to the right, that is going to disable the vibration function and the LED ring lights. And if we turn that back on, we'll get a small little vibration on the back and the lights will come back on. To the side of that, we have what looks to be a canceled HDMI port, a charging port, a microphone hole, an SD card slot, and a headphone jack. When it comes to the case quality, this is not the best feeling shell that I've ever used under $100, but it does feel like a decent step up from the TRIMUI Smart. That shell feels really cheap in comparison. Now, if you do have a TRIMUI Smart, that's pretty good because you'll know exactly what this is going to feel like for most of the buttons. The D-pad and the ABXY buttons are basically a drop-in copy from that. Even the shoulder buttons feel identical, but they're a bit bigger on the TRIMUI Smart. That just leaves us with ergonomics, and when you take into account the types of games that run the best on this processor, this is a really good layout for those games. The device feels pretty comfortable in this position, and even feels decent when you're playing games that need the left analog stick, but it doesn't feel great when you need to use the left analog stick and the left shoulder buttons. In this situation right here, L2 is mapped to the Z button for N64, and that button combination does not feel great on this. While R2 also isn't great, it would be a much better option for the Z button based on this controller layout. In this section, I want to go over the software, and since this is an entirely new system that we haven't looked at before, I want to do a deep dive. Right now, this OS is built on Tina Linux, and it comes from TRIMUI. They have given developer units to the Just Enough Linux team, but it might not be that straightforward to get third-party OSs going on this. I hope that they do. This would be a decent addition to the platform. Here we are in the main system, and we have a couple of things that we can do here. Right now, we're in the emulator menu, and we'll come back to this in just a second. On the top, we have several categories. If we go into the section that's titled Best, there is a single Pokemon section with a collection of games inside. You can see that it says that there are 43 games here, but I've already gone ahead and deleted most of the ones like Chaos Black and Blue Sea. Those shouldn't still be in here. We still have a few weeks before this ships, and there are a couple of software bugs that they still need to fix. Just keep in mind that this is like an engineering sample, and anyone that has this right now is using beta software. The recent and favorite sections are self-explanatory, so let's just move over to the settings menu to see what we can do. The first thing that we have is display controls. This thing does get pretty dim at its lowest level, and it's also decently bright at the highest level. We have the ability to turn off the LED ring lights, but we don't have the ability to customize the color. As I said before, if you change the function switch on the bottom, you will shut off the lights, but this will have more functionality in the future. When it comes to the LED brightness, 1 to 4 is a decent setting. I have this set to 4 so it doesn't blow out the footage, but even 10 looks good in person. Not a whole lot when it comes to volume controls. They have background music on this just like on all of the other devices that they make. I find those annoying, so we can just set this to 0. Volume levels are decent on the Pro, but there's a bug right now where the volume level that you set in here will reset back to this whenever you exit a game. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, this thing does have Wi-Fi support, which is good to have for a variety of things. It makes it easier to update some RetroArch things, but it also allows you to do wireless co-op with a few cores. With that, we also have the ability to make a hotspot to make the entire thing easier. Moving on, we have a theme support section, but we don't have any themes yet. I've changed the background picture on the device system-wide because I like how it looks better than default. If you see this in other settings, the background will change many times as you navigate through the UI with the stock configuration. It was just way too distracting for me. The main settings menu has a few things that are useful. We can set the CPU frequency control on this up to a locked 2 GHz, but I'm just going to keep this on default for this entire video. 2 GHz will cause this thing to get pretty toasty, and it's not needed for most of what this can do. But it is always good to have some control like this at your fingertips so you can chase battery life or performance if that's what you want. There are systems that will override what you set in here and just set this thing like full tilt no matter what, but I hope that those will be fixed in the future. If we go down to the version release, this is a developer build that was made just a couple of days ago. They are still working on ironing out some of the kinks that this has because this is not finished by any stretch of the imagination. That just leaves us with the games listing. I've changed some of what was included with my 64 GB card, but a lot of this is going to be similar to what you would get if you bought this. Inside the main system, you'll see that we have a list of games. They have kept the text that would be in the parentheses or brackets for a ROM file name. I've asked if they could remove this because this text would usually be ignored on devices like these to make this list look better. You will usually only see the region code listed in the first parentheses if the text isn't completely removed from the UI. On the right side, we have a small window for the box art, and there's kind of like a mismatch for this. Usually on squarish devices, you'll have a smaller window for the ROMs list, or the ROMs list will just like cut off like it is on Just Enough Linux, but you get a ton of space for the box art. This layout doesn't seem equitable at all. Like really, you'd want to have the box art to be at least half the screen because we do have a bigger screen on this. It should be possible to make a better layout that allows you to read the full ROM name and have a decent space to fit metadata and box arts. With the way that things are now, things don't look that great with some of the aspect ratios that are used for box art. When you find a game that you want to play, just press a button to launch it and it will launch with a pre-configured core. In some instances, you'll have overlays that are applied, but for this system, we don't have that. If we press the menu button, we're going to end up inside a small UI window. This is common on TRIMUI and MIUI devices. We have a couple of options here. We have save state and load state, and you can have a total of 10 for these. For some reason, we don't have screenshots for the load menu, but that's probably just a UI bug. If you select the advanced menu option, that will bring you out into RetroArch, and they have set this up with the XMB theme. From what I can see, nothing is hidden to the end user. You can change anything that you want while you're in here, which is not always a given on these handhelds. And just so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about, here's a system that does have an overlay applied by default. I have changed some of the things to get this to fit properly, but it does work and it's a good use of screen space that would otherwise go unused. Before we head into the emulation section, I did just want to make sure there were no issues with the buttons. I wasn't having any issues doing some of the combos here, but I did find out that I wasn't able to use L1, which was kind of strange. After going into the tester application, I found that you cannot press L1 and write on the directional pad at the same time, and it's the only combination like this that I could find. It's really awkward. As you can see, I'm holding down right on the D-pad and I'm trying to press L1 and it doesn't register inside this application. And it also doesn't work in other games. So here's Mario and I'm holding down L1 and I can't use right on the D-pad. I reported this issue and I've been told that this will be fixed before this ships. One other thing that I wanted to test out, they have a controller mode called like rotate 90 degrees, which is to play these kinds of games, but it doesn't work. I had to manually change a bunch of settings to get this to work. And once you do that, it does work out really well with the recessed analog stick that we have. We have a pretty big emulation section for this video, and that's largely because I haven't looked at this processor at all on this channel. In this section, we're gonna group NES, Master System, Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and PC Engine, and they all run great on this device. For our next group, we have Genesis and Game Boy Advance. Both of these run great on this hardware, and they also have overlays applied by default. The next two systems that we're going to look at are Super Nintendo and Nintendo DS. For Super Nintendo, we're going to use the SNES 9X 2005 core, and for DS, we're going to use Drastic. Now we're into the bigger systems, and our first one is Dreamcast. We don't have access to a standalone emulator, so I would expect to see better performance than we can get right here. We're not running at the lowest resolution possible, so there is still some room for performance improvement on the RA core that we're using, but I would say generally this is going to be able to play a lot of Dreamcast games.
Trust me.
That's great!
When it comes to PS1, we also don't have access to a standalone emulator. We have to use RA for this, but we are able to use the enhanced resolution option, and even demanding games like Bloody Roar 2 have no issues. Given that we do have a 16:9 screen, it would be nice to be able to use something like Duck Station on this in the future. When it comes to PSP, I messed around a bit to try and find the best settings. There are some games that can go up to 3x native without frame skip. This game almost runs that well, but we need to go down to 2x, and it can still lag with some spell animations in combat. That same 2x native resolution works a lot better in a game like Daxter. When we try Monster Hunter 3rd, that game runs slow even at 1x native resolution when we are in the main area. That's when we need to go into the settings and turn on auto frame skip. That eliminates the sound issues, and it also lets us use 2x native resolution. 3x native can also work on this, but it's not as smooth as 2x, so I'm going to stick with 2x and auto frame skip for the rest of the titles in this section. Nintendo 64 is the biggest section that I tested for this video. I've emulated a ton of N64 and handhelds that this competes with, and I noticed that this does not have some of the graphical issues or bugs that are common on those devices. In some games it has entirely new ones, but when it comes to performance, it's pretty decent overall.
You've got an enemy on your tail. Use the brake.
Let's jump into the teardown. I'm going to put the back shell off to the side for now so we can talk about the main board. So, a couple of things I'm seeing right away. Our processor is over here, and eagle-eye viewers will notice that they're not using the battery as a heatsink in the Smart Pro. That tells me that these guys did not graduate from the Ambernick School of Engineering and Industrial Design. It's unfortunate, but I'm going to have to deduct points for that. In all seriousness though, this is a decent layout. They have a metal frame underneath the screen, which is something that we don't usually see in devices like this. That's going to make the entire thing a bit more rigid, and it will help transfer heat. But we need to take the PCB out to get a better look. Even though I was joking, I do think it's pretty good that they did not use the battery as a heatsink, because that's just kind of crap design work. I also think that there's enough space on the top of the processor for a small copper heatsink. They have said that the inside of this might change on retail units, but I haven't seen those changes yet. You'll also notice that the speakers are behind the controller board. So again, they're not front firing. The exit point is on the side here and here. That is not ideal. The speaker hole is down here. It would probably have been better if they would have just rotated the speakers so that this other one isn't pointing directly at the battery. With the PCB out, we can see that the entire metal frame goes from one end to the other. The main board is small on this, and this reminds me of the RP3 motherboard a lot. Actually, a lot of what's going on here reminds me of the internal design of the RP3. I have to imagine that they were inspired to some extent. That just leaves us with the back shell. As you can see, we have a round motor here. This one was super strong with the first version of the software that I had, but it's not that bad now. It would have been better if this was closer to the middle, but you can't win them all. But this is the most important part of this entire section of the video. As I said earlier, I think this part is way too small, and whoever designed this for TRIMUI did the company a big disservice, because this is the only thing that I can find that is objectively bad about this device. It can be fixed, but I don't think that it will be fixed. The cheapest and fastest solution would be to just extend this out a bit more, like maybe to here, and it would be better. It wouldn't look that great with the back shell the way that it is, but it would work and it would make it easier to use. You can get something like that done in about a week or so if you fast track the mold, because it's just this tiny part of the entire shoulder button. It's not the base that it clips onto. The best thing that they could do would be to change that and the back mold to accommodate a bigger button. Then I don't think anyone would have any issues with this, because the rest is pretty good. Let's do some quick pros and cons before wrapping up with my overall thoughts. On the pro side, I think the screen is good. It has a decent maximum brightness and colors look good. I also think this hybrid design is nice, especially if you're a fan of this controller layout. They have a retro SKU that I think looks good in the render, but my money would be on the all black one. Finally, the performance is much better than I would have thought when I saw the GPU that this had. On the con side, you already know what is at number one. R2 and L2 are not good. If we all just collectively forget that this has R2 and L2, this device is awesome. I'm considering a 3D printed part to clip onto that base that I showed you if there isn't an official solution in the future. Outside of that, the software is a bit rough around the edges right now, but that is to be expected for any handheld that's a few weeks out from the official launch date. The team has been working hard to squash all of the bugs that I found over the last week or so I imagine that this will be in a much better situation come next month, but I did want to have this in this section because it does exist while I'm making this review video. Now, all that being said, this is the best device that TRIMUI has released under their own brand. The Model S was crap when it launched with crazy screen tearing and a pretty laughable price. The TRIMUI Smart was decent when it launched, but it didn't do anything better than the more popular MIUI Mini, and it was also not that cheap. This feels like a big step up from those devices. If this ends up within the price range that I outlined at the beginning of this video, it's a decent handheld worth the asking price. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see another, take a look at a video that I did on the DS in 2023. Happy gaming everyone, Taki out.